Hello, my name is Andrew Baum, and today I want to give you sort of just a little presentation on the field of education and what I've learned for researching for this project and just through my time as a education major. Without further ado, let's move on to the first slide. Excuse me. So the things that surprised me while studying the education major are three main points: the diversity, the pay, and the importance of communication. Let's start with point one: diversity. What do I mean by that? So before I became a education major, I wasn't sure about the how many types of concentrations there was. I myself am a TESOL major, but there's early childhood education majors. There's biological science concentration for education majors. There's so many different types. What else? There's primary, but there's special education. But there's so many different types of. The point is, there's so many different types of concentrations inside of the field of education. The next point is the pay. Before I became an education major, and before I started researching for this, I actually assumed that the pay for being a teacher was very low. That's what you always hear put out, like, oh, the teachers don't get paid enough. And that's true. But some states pay better than others. And while researching for the amount that teachers in Ohio are actually paid, I found out that it is not actually as low as people say. According to, let me bring up the statistic here, the average public school teacher salary in Ohio as of March 2021, according to salary.com, is $57,671, which was way more than the $32,000 that I was told. But yeah, so the pay was one of the things that surprised me. Moving on to the next point, the importance of communication. So this surprised me as well as like finding out that it wasn't just communication between the teacher and the student. It was communication, like being a education major, you have to know how to communicate with students, yes, but also with parents and with other teachers. And I'll get more into that later. Next slide here. What kinds of writing do education majors do? Well, there's three types of writing that education majors mostly do: narrative, analytical, and argumentative. So let's start with the first point here, narrative. Narrative writing is writing that shows an overall story to communicate a theme or idea. Analytical writing requires an individual to analyze the value of something, such as whether the argument of an article has any merit. And lastly, argumentative requires that the person has a well-formed thesis and strong main points to bring an opposing side more towards your side. Use of rhetoric is also a key thing in argumentative writing. It's really important that teachers, education majors, know all three of these so that they're able to relay these to their students as well. But yeah, these are the three main types of writing that education majors mostly have to do. How do professionals communicate with one another? So professionals communicate through school board meetings, school emails, and collaboratively. And I'll tell you what I mean by that last point in a second here. So professionals communicate through school board meetings. I was a TA, a teacher's assistant for Dominion Academy of Dayton last year, just before COVID went down, actually. And we had these school board meetings quarterly, basically where all the teachers and the staff, they got together and they were able to communicate their concerns and also just communicate the concerns, make sure everybody's on the same page. So that was one form of communication that was heavily utilized at the school that I worked at. School emails, of course, we have one for Wright State, Wright.edu, but there was also one for the school that I worked at for Dominion Academy. Collaboratively, lastly. And so here's what I mean by that. No education major is simply just alone, as in like there's not just a teacher that's doing his own thing. When I was working there at Dominion, all the teachers worked as if they were on one giant soccer team, figuring out what's going wrong, training together, basically checking out with each other. Are you guys doing okay? Do we have the same problems with this one student? What does this student need? But all the teachers worked as if they were on a team, and that was really important as well, that I found while researching and that I also found through experience. What questions are asked by education scholars in the field? So 3 major questions, very hot topics right now, was COVID concerns, questions on parent involvement, and individual learning styles. So with COVID concerns, I found that a lot of teachers right now, let me see here, they're asking, is it safe to go back to school? If children are carriers and many teachers are older, that's just straight up a recipe for disaster. The next question, how do we get more parents involved in the events and everyday life of the school so everyone's on the same page? This is one that was actually, that's what the school board meetings, they had sections inside the meeting, basically. In the minutes, we were able to look back through what parents were saying. But this was a section of our meetings too. Like, how do we get the parents more involved inside of the school? And how much is too involved? Because when we were at some school board meetings, some parents would come in and have legitimate concerns for their children, but they didn't consider all the other details. So yeah, figuring out where the limits of that was a question that a lot of my my actual teachers who were there at Dominion were asking. Individual learning styles was another concern. There's no cookie cutter learning style is what I found out from looking up stuff here. For all kids, and finding out how to get students at least a bit of what they need is something that a lot of teachers and a lot of education majors are still trying to answer. Let's move on to the next slide here. Sorry. What constitutes proper evidence / support in your field? 3 things constitute proper evidence and support in the field. 1, credible resources. 2, witnesses and 2 teacher support systems for disciplining. And 3, wellness days and morale luncheons. So for the first point, use of credible resources. That's basically making sure that when you're writing a paper as an education major and you're submitting stuff for your degree, you're submitting stuff for a class, that you do not have any plagiarism, that you are not borrowing someone's ideas, their words, or paraphrasing without giving proper credit. But also credibility in the sense of you need to make sure that your resources are basically that they are well backed up, that your resources are relevant, they're not completely outdated, and that the authors of your resources have proper credentials and that you can verify those credentials. The next was a 2 witness and 2 teacher support system for disciplining. So we had this at the school that I worked at, and basically you needed to have when a student did something that was against the moral policy, the moral code of the school, you would always have 2 witnesses that something went down, and you would have 2 teachers there. So an adult was never alone with one child disciplining him. That was never the case. And that helped keep the parents basically supported, and the parents. That helped keep the teachers accountable and supported, and also created a good accountability system for everybody, a good support system there. That lastly was wellness days and morale luncheons. So this was at the end of each quarter, towards the end, all of the teachers were given free meals, basically, and so that was really good for morale and also for team building, as we were given a little bit longer lunch days, which was usually towards the end of the semester and the end of each quarter. But so we had all 3 of those. What are the kinds of language and writing conventions in the field of education? So the common conventions for education major are MUGs. This is basically your mechanics, usage of grammar. Basically that you have good, it kind of speaks for itself, mechanics and grammar. The next was procedural writing. And what this was basically, you need to learn how to make lesson plans. You need to make those lesson plans effective so that you can make the most of your time, your limited time that you have with the students as an education major. What are considered no-nos when writing or communicating in the field of education? I touched on this earlier on, but a big no-no is plagiarism. You need to make sure that none of your stuff is borrowed, that none of your stuff is too inspired by other stuff. You need to make sure that, and if it is, making sure that all your resources are properly cited. You can have good intentions to not cheat or to not accidentally inspire your lessons plan by somebody else's work. You can accidentally do that by just forgetting to cite, and that's still plagiarism. So making sure not to do that is a big no-no in the field of education. Also, disorganization. Making sure that if you don't have your lesson plans properly organized, and if you don't have all your, basically what you're going to say written down beforehand as an education major, you're going to be wasting your students' time. And also, you're going to be wasting your time without maximizing your resources that you have. So basically, yeah, disorganization and plagiarism, those are two big no-nos in the field of education. What hot topics have I discovered while in this English class? Well, in this English class, I've discovered three main hot topics. First, I've discovered the vastness of the field of education. Basically, just even within the major that I have of TESOL, I found out that you could also be an administrator. You don't just have to just be a plain teacher. You could be an administrator for teacher, for helping out like vice principals, being like an assistant, a secretary as well. It's not just straight up, you have this concentration. You can only be a teacher for this specific concentration. That's true, but like you also have a little bit more room. Second was the differences between online learning and in-person. While in this class, I have experienced basically that there's a lot more responsibility on the student inside of online learning versus in person. And just going through this class, it's actually been very helpful. But having more responsibility and more freedom to make your own schedule with your classes and with how you do your work, that's been one of the things while going through this class has been, it's been a struggle because there's less in-person contact. There's less, I'm a learner by visual, but yeah, that was a big difference there, the amount of responsibility. And how COVID affects teacher-student rapport. Again, usually inside of like classes, like before COVID went down, you would build a rapport with your teacher by just like, by talking after class or something like that. That would be like a way to make yourself known. If you have a question, you can ask, building that sort of rapport there. But that was one of the things that like, it looks different now. Now you have to text, you have to be a little bit more sociable than you would, and maybe post in the Discord, maybe post inside Slack. Those are the things of building teacher-student rapport now instead of actually talking. What am I most proud of in my research argument? I am most proud of three things: the thesis, researching, and also the new knowledge I've gained about the topic of porn addiction. So I'm most proud of my thesis because basically that's something that I know that a lot of guys struggle with addiction to porn and the effects that it would have, and just wondering about what are the effects of porn addiction on our future men. What are the ramifications of that? So that's why I was most proud of my thesis. More men need to be talking about it. Secondly, I'm proud of my work in researching. So I was not aware of websites like Fight the New Drug, causes like that gather together important data-backed research on why pornography is such an epidemic. So finding out about those resources was really awesome, and just many hours were spent in finding some good resources to back up the claims that I made for my thesis. Also, thirdly, I'm also proud of the new knowledge that I've gained about the topic of porn addiction. And I learned that it actually affects your grades. There were studies done that pornography affects your ability to keep attention, and it also affects your ability to have be consistent and to have good grades, which in turn, those things affect your grades, is what I mean. But yes, those are those three things there. What are the weaknesses in my paper that I plan to revise? I plan to revise the length. Specifically, I need to make it a lot longer. I need to add a page further to each of my main points underneath my thesis. And also I need to, basically that's what I need to do. And I need to change the intro a little bit. Second, I plan to make my intro more concise into the thesis. I noticed that I had my thesis at the end of the second paragraph, and basically I plan to change that to make sure that it is worded less confusingly, and that it is concise, and that it's more condensed, rather. Third, I plan to support my third main point more substantially, and I plan to do this by adding some more studies to back up my research that I have, and also to explain the implications of the resources that I have, and the quotes that I've put inside of my paper. With all that being said, thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope that you may have been, whoever's listening to this, may have been given a nice introduction to the field of education. Thank you so much. I'm Andrew Baum. You guys have a great day. See ya.